They told us deserts were barren, that from Sahel's scorched earth, nothing good could grow. But in the heart of this dust-blown emptiness, something is rising. Not a mirage, but a monument. And not just a monument, but a movement. A 250-meter tower of steel and fire, surrounded by over 11,000 mirrors, each one reflecting more than just sunlight. They reflect a dream, a defiance, a declaration. Burkina Faso, a landlocked, overlooked nation, once spoke only in whispers on the world stage. Now, under the leadership of a young soldier-turned-statesman, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, it roars with ambition. His mission is bold: to bottle the sun, to light every village, to export power instead of importing poverty. What begins as a solar plant becomes a political earthquake, threatening the old order of fossil fuel dependency and Western control. This is not about electricity. This is about dignity. This is about Africa standing up and staying lit. Stay with us. This is more than a solar tower. It's a battle for dignity, sovereignty, and Africa's rebirth. Subscribe and stand with us, because this time the sun shines for us. From a distance, it looked like a hallucination, an ocean of glinting light shimmering in the brutal heat of the Sahel. But as the convoy of black SUVs approached, the truth came into focus. Towering above the golden dust stood a 250-meter colossus of steel and glass. Around it, like loyal sentinels, nearly 11,000 heliostats, giant solar tracking mirrors, tilted in perfect synchrony, catching the unforgiving African sun and directing it toward the tower's summit. This wasn't a Western-funded experiment. It wasn't a borrowed blueprint from China or the Gulf. It was conceived in silence under the watchful eye of Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the 36-year-old president of Burkina Faso. To outsiders, he was enigmatic, part revolutionary, part strategist. But to those who followed closely, this was the beginning of something seismic. The plan was audacious: use concentrated solar power to heat molten salts to over 600 degrees Celsius, heat so intense it could be stored long after sunset. This was not your typical solar panel farm. This was thermal engineering on a scale few African nations had dared to imagine. It could generate electricity during the night. It could operate through sandstorms and drought. It could do what diesel could not: liberate a country from fossil fuel chains. Construction began in silence. Traoré understood the risks, not just from armed insurgents, but from global energy titans with vested interests. So he masked the shipments. Turbine parts arrived under the pretext of water infrastructure. Security teams were labeled counterinsurgency units. Even members of his own cabinet were left in the dark until the project was too far along to sabotage. Why such secrecy? Because energy is power, not just economic but political, and Traoré knew the cost of being too visible too soon. If Burkina Faso, a nation dismissed by the global elite as irrelevant, could master solar thermal energy, it would no longer be ignored. It would become essential. At the core of the operation was a commitment to independence. For generations, the country had been shackled to imported fuels: diesel generators for villages, kerosene lamps for homes, and erratic power grids for cities. With every shipment of fuel came debt. With every loan came compromise. But with this tower, Traoré sought to rewrite the rules. He envisioned a nation that would not beg for electrons but produce and sell them. That would not rely on aging colonial grids but build its own. That would not pollute to grow, but grow to protect. The site near Gorom Gorom was chosen not just for its sunlight, but for its symbolism. A land long branded uninhabitable was about to become the birthplace of a new African future. A place once written off as cursed was being reborn as a crucible of innovation. As the first structures rose from the sand, engineers worked in tight coordination. Each heliostat was calibrated with military precision. The receivers atop the tower gleamed like a crown. And deep within the facility, turbines waited, silent, patient, ready for the day they'd hum to life and flood the grid with light. Traoré visited the site often, sometimes without fanfare, sometimes with hand-picked aides. Each visit reinforced his conviction. This wasn't just about watts and wires. It was about will. He stood beneath the growing tower one afternoon as the Sahel wind howled around him and whispered, "This is our weapon. This is our shield. This is our promise." And indeed, it was all three. A weapon because energy would give Burkina Faso leverage against those who once dictated terms through oil and loans. A shield because electrified villages meant stronger infrastructure, fewer insurgencies, and economic security. And a promise because to every Burkina Faso child born in darkness, this tower whispered, "Your future will be bright." What began as a quiet construction site was quickly becoming the most guarded secret in the region. The government moved swiftly to fortify the area. Satellites were misdirected. Air traffic was rerouted. Contracts were split among African, Asian, and European firms to prevent dominance by any one power. Yet despite every precaution, there was a sense of inevitability that this fire, once bottled, would attract eyes from far beyond the Sahel. But when the first mirror tilted and the tower caught its light, what it ignited wasn't just electricity, it was attention. And not all of it welcomed. The sun had barely dipped below the horizon when the first signs of friction emerged. What was once a carefully guarded secret began to pulse through intelligence cables, diplomatic chatter, and oil consortium boardrooms. Burkina Faso, landlocked, underfunded, underestimated, was doing the unthinkable. Powering its own future without foreign fuel, it started with whispers, nothing unusual. Then came the drone sightings, unmarked, circling the solar field at low altitude. Too precise to be hobbyists, too persistent to be curious tourists. Security teams scrambled, tracing their origin. They found nothing, only that someone, somewhere, was mapping the site. Next came the sabotage. A convoy transporting molten salt storage components vanished in the desert. Its charred remains were found days later, miles off course. No group claimed responsibility, but the message was clear. This wasn't an accident, it was interference. Then another blow. A critical shipment of turbines sat inexplicably detained at a West African port. The customs holdup, officials said, was procedural. Traore's intelligence network said otherwise. Back-channel influence, quiet pressure, engineered delay. And in the background, soft murmurs grew louder. European ambassadors requesting technical inspections. Oil lobbies offering generous alternatives. Natural gas deals, energy loans, conditional investments. Western think tanks publishing concerns about the plant's viability and transparency. It was a subtle siege. Death by diplomacy, sabotage through suggestion. But Captain Ibrahim Traoré had anticipated this. He did not flinch. He moved like a general on a battlefield of shadows. First, he reshaped the security perimeter around the project. Disguised special forces, trained not just in combat but engineering, now walked the site as foremen and technicians. Anti-drone jammers were installed discreetly, camouflaged within comms towers. Supply chains were rerouted through allied states, some in North Africa, others across the Red Sea. He didn't just defend the tower, he defended the narrative. Traoré understood something his adversaries did not. Perception was power. If the project was seen as Burkina, it could be isolated. If it was seen as African, it became untouchable. So he changed the story. Through calculated leaks, the president seeded articles in Pan-African newspapers, from Dakar to Nairobi, portraying the solar plan as the first step in a continental energy awakening. Africa's sun revolution, they called it. Headlines praised Traoré not just as a national leader, but as a son of the Sahel carrying the dreams of a continent. He invited journalists, not from CNN or the BBC, but from Ghana, Kenya, Senegal. He opened the gates. He let cameras roll. What was once a secret became a symbol. And that symbol, now public, now precious, became dangerous to attack. Any strike on the plant now risked continental backlash. What began as one man's ambition had evolved into a shared vision. He was no longer just building a power station. He was constructing solidarity. Yet the pressure mounted. Foreign governments pushed harder. One European official warned the plant must meet international standards or face trade complications. An American diplomat hinted that regional security funding might be reconsidered if Burkina Faso pivoted too far from traditional energy models. Even the shadows grew bolder. Intelligence officers reported sightings of armed groups converging in the Sahel, some bearing insignias known to work with smuggling rings tied to oil mafias. The threat wasn't ideological, it was economic. The attack came at dusk. A team of saboteurs, disguised as contractors, breached the perimeter near the coolant facility. They carried explosives, encrypted comms, and maps too accurate to be guessed, but they didn't expect the response. Within minutes, special forces closed in. A firefight erupted under the desert sky. When the dust settled, the intruders were in custody, and so was a laptop containing communications with an offshore account linked to an international oil firm. Traoré wasted no time. The next morning, he held a press conference, not from a palace, but from the base of the solar tower. Cameras zoomed in as he addressed the continent. For too long, he declared, they told us our sun was a curse, that we were doomed to import light while exporting our dignity. No more. This tower is not just for Burkina Faso. It is for every child who deserves to read at night, every farmer who deserves power for their pumps, every woman who deserves safety lit by street lamps. This is our revolution. The words echoed across the Sahel. In Accra, youth groups gathered in solidarity. In Nairobi, solar collectives launched support campaigns. On social media, the hashtags multiplied. Just Solar Africa, Just Burkina Rising, Shout Power to the People. But with each cheer came a deeper warning, because now Traore had turned the tower into a continental flame. And flames, if not protected, attract the cold wind of enemies. When the turbines roared to life and the first surge of electricity pulsed into the national grid, it wasn't just cables that carried power, it was possibility. For the first time in Burkina Faso's history, rural clinics could refrigerate vaccines overnight. Midwives delivered babies under electric lights instead of flickering candles. Students studied past sunset. The light, literal and symbolic, spread like a blessing across the Sahel. In villages once tethered to diesel generators or resigned to darkness, something changed. With electricity came water. Pumps irrigated fields deep into the night. Crops that once wilted in the dry season now thrived under hydration. Food security improved. Women, freed from hours of gathering firewood, opened shops with cold drinks and solar-charged radios humming news from across Africa. A small textile workshop in Dori began producing school uniforms using electric looms. In the outskirts of Ouagadougou, a group of young engineers launched a startup assembling battery packs from local materials. They called themselves Children of the Sun. Traore's government moved quickly. Profits from energy exports, newly signed deals with Mali, Ghana, and Niger, flowed into a national electrification program. The president pledged that within 5 years, every village would be connected to the grid. It was not just a promise. It was a strategy. To consolidate momentum, Traore launched 2 flagship policies. First, the Burkina Battery Initiative, a state-backed push to develop local storage technology and reduce reliance on foreign imports. Second, the Solar Scholars Program, offering full scholarships to engineering students across Africa who would study renewables in Ouagadougou's new Polytechnic for energy sovereignty. But as light spread, so did shadows. In the corridors of power, murmurs grew louder. Some ministers, especially those tied to legacy fossil fuel contracts, grumbled that the president's focus on the tower came at the expense of traditional sectors. Importers of diesel and petrol, once power brokers in the capital, found their influence dwindling. They didn't like it. Business elites, comfortable with foreign aid structures and familiar middlemen, began to whisper to embassies. They used words like instability, populism, over-centralization. Some leaked memos. Others hosted quiet dinners with envoys. Traore knew the pattern. The same script had played out across Africa for decades. When a leader threatened established interests, foreign or domestic, they were branded a risk. He struck first. Within 6 months of the plant's activation, he launched a sweeping government reshuffle. Ministers with close ties to fossil fuel firms were reassigned to ceremonial posts abroad. In their place, he appointed technocrats, young, Pan-African, fiercely loyal. Many had fought beside him during the insurgency. Others were engineers turned policymakers. Their allegiance was not to old money, but to a new vision. Procurement offices were restructured. Oversight bodies were digitized. Every franc earned from solar exports was audited publicly each quarter, streamed online, reviewed by independent panels. Corruption, long tolerated in the shadows, was dragged into the light. Still, resistance persisted. An anonymous letter surfaced, sent to an international watchdog, accusing the government of concentrating too much power in the energy sector. The allegations were vague but timely. Western media picked it up. Editorials questioned Traore's ambitions. The IMF sent observers, but Traore didn't flinch. He welcomed scrutiny and then went further. He offered shares in the solar project, not to foreign investors, but to the people. Every village connected to the grid would receive community equity in the plant's expansion. Revenues would flow directly into local councils, earmarked for health, schools, and infrastructure. It was a masterstroke. Suddenly, every attempt to undermine the tower became an attack on the villagers it powered. The energy wasn't just national, it was personal. Farmers in Tapoa spoke of the solar tower as our second sun. Children wrote songs about Ibrahim's light. Women's cooperatives organized watch groups to report any suspicious activity near transmission lines. What had started as a state project had become a civic symbol. Yet beneath the glow, the risk remained. Would this momentum sustain? Could the infrastructure keep pace with expectation? Could national unity outlast economic jealousy? Because with every kilowatt delivered came a rising tide of hope. And hope, once awakened, demands more than just light. It demands justice, equity, and unwavering vision. Do you believe this is the future Africa deserves? Let us know in the comments, because power belongs to the people. Beyond Burkina Faso's borders, the tower's light casts long shadows. In energy boardrooms, diplomatic circles, and intelligence briefings from Washington to Brussels, a new file appeared on the table: Ibrahim Traoré's energy gamble. It wasn't just about solar panels or turbines. It was about what the tower represented: an African nation seizing its own energy future. Without permission, without loans, without dependence. Oil companies were the first to stir. A European consortium, heavily invested in West African natural gas, quietly lobbied for regulatory reviews of Burkina Faso's export policies. Their concern was framed as market fairness. In truth, they feared precedent. If Burkina Faso could power its economy without oil, others would follow. Billions hung in the balance. In Washington, the tone was more nuanced. American diplomats praised the project in public, highlighting climate leadership and regional stability. But behind closed doors, they raised alarms. Reports suggested discussions around conditional security cooperation, linking Sahel anti-terror support to energy transparency requirements. At the same time, French officials, long embedded in Burkina's institutions, began warning of geopolitical imbalance in the region. Their concern? Traoré's growing ties to China, Morocco, and Pan-African investors. But the president was already 3 moves ahead. He built a firewall, not just of security, but of narrative. Rather than resist international pressure directly, he diffused it. Ownership of the solar expansion was quietly shared with neighbors. Small stakes offered to Mali, Niger, and Ghana. Transmission lines were pitched as regional corridors, not national assets. By making them stakeholders, he ensured that any attack on the project would reverberate across borders. Then came the optics. He invited observers from the African Union to tour the plant. Live broadcasts showed them inspecting facilities, reviewing safety protocols, and applauding its potential. This, one delegate declared, is what African independence looks like in the 21st century. Even more strategically, Traoré declined to choose between East and West. While European aid waned, he secured financing from South African banks. While U.S. influence simmered, he welcomed Korean and Emirati engineers to join in Phase 2 construction. No single power could claim him, and none could isolate him. The world watched, some with admiration, others with unease. Because in the shimmering heat of the Sahel, a dangerous idea had taken root: that Africa could lead not by imitation, but by innovation. That sovereignty wasn't gifted by superpowers. It was engineered, mirror by mirror, watt by watt. And though embassies drafted cables and CEOs revised forecasts, none could ignore what was now clear: the age of quiet compliance was over. Africa had found its fire, and the world would have to adjust to the glare. By 2027, the tower in the Sahel no longer stood alone. Across Burkina Faso's vast, sun-scorched landscape, new towers were rising, smaller, swifter to build, connected by smart grids. From Garam to the outskirts of Bobo Dioulasso, the solar web expanded, weaving light into places long forgotten by central planning. But Traoré's vision reached further than national borders. He launched the Sahelian Grid Initiative, a bold proposal to interconnect renewable power across West Africa. Transmission corridors extended toward Mali, Ghana, Ivory Coast. With prices undercutting global benchmarks, the offer was impossible to ignore. Leaders who once doubted him now came seeking contracts. Even former critics, governments, investors, lined up to join what was being quietly called Africa's energy era. Still, Traoré refused complacency. He knew revolutions don't last by momentum alone. They demand institutions. He channeled solar revenues into a sovereign energy fund, ring-fenced for long-term investment in education, irrigation, and healthcare. He rolled out community co-ownership of future plants, villagers receiving dividends tied directly to energy output. No longer mere recipients of aid, they became shareholders in sovereignty. But with every success, new tensions brewed. Some elites warned that rapid expansion might deepen inequality between electrified towns and remote zones still in darkness. Others whispered that Traoré's centralization of power, even if visionary, bordered on authoritarian. Foreign media circled, eager to spot cracks: corruption, overreach, fatigue. Traoré did not deny the risks. Instead, he turned them into public debates. Town halls were broadcast live, Citizens questioned ministers. Audits scrolled across public screens in bus stations. Our future, he said, must be lit not just by solar energy, but by accountability. He also turned competitors into collaborators. He proposed a Pan-African solar alliance, inviting countries from Sudan into Senegal to replicate Burkina's model, with Ouagadougou offering technical expertise, training, and startup capital. The goal wasn't domination, it was diffusion. And perhaps that was his most radical act, sharing power. Because in doing so, he ensured the survival of the revolution, not as a monument in the desert, but as a movement across the continent. Yet the road ahead is steep. Climate shocks loom. Energy greed could return. But one truth remains: Africa now holds the blueprint. The only question is, will it choose to follow it together or fall back into the shadows of dependence once more? As the sun vanished behind the Sahel horizon and the tower at Gorom Gorom began to glow from stored heat, a quiet truth settled over the desert. Something irreversible had begun. Burkina Faso, once invoked only in the language of poverty, now stood as a living testament to what happens when vision meets will. A nation without a coast had become a lighthouse. And at the center of that light was a man who dared to ask, what if Africa no longer begged for power, but became its source? Ibrahim Traoré's energy project was never just about engineering. It was about rewriting narrative, reclaiming agency, reshaping Africa not in the mirror of the West, but in the brilliance of its own sun. From rural health clinics to regional diplomacy, the ripple effects of the Ibrahim Traoré energy project continue to unfold. And with every kilowatt exported, every village lit, every school connected, a new generation of Africans is learning that solar power Africa is not a dream, it is a direction. Challenges remain, storms will come, but the tower still burns, its fire steady, its reflection multiplied across the continent. If this story stirs something deep inside you, don't stay silent. Like, share, Suri, and subscribe. Because from the heart of the desert, Africa is rising, and it's our time to shine. So what do you see in this light? Do you see a country chasing hope, or a continent claiming destiny? Tell us. Speak your truth. Because in this age of awakening, silence is no longer an option. Solar Power Africa is not just a solution, it is a statement. And the Ibrahim Traoré Energy Project is no longer his alone. It belongs to all of us. Comment below, Africa can do it. Because today we don't just survive, we lead.